All right. So, welcome back to Sociological Theory. This is for the week of September 27th, 29th, and October 1st. September 27th being that Monday, October 1st being that Friday. So, this is the lecture for that week. Yes. So we are talking about the Chicago School of Sociology. We're going to talk a little bit about Irving Goffman. We're also talking about, who else is it? It's Irving Goffman, and trying to think about it without looking at him. Oh, George Herbert Mead. Talking about Irving Goffman and George Herbert Mead. And let's see. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think we're just going to stick with that for this week. And what I want to do is I want to start with number one, going over what the Chicago School of Sociology is. And then going into these two particular theories. And as you can see, it's not going to be a very long lecture because the assignment that I'm going to give you to do, and I'm giving you a week to do the assignment, is already a long assignment anyway. Typically, even in this class, if it was in person, it would take about 2 days to do it. So this isn't going to be that long at all. But in order to kind of prepare for this assignment, and kind of a different way of looking at what you're getting ready to do, the activity you're going to do at the end, I do want to go over the Chicago School of Sociology, this the body, the self, and then the I and me, or the me and I, and then go into face, and what that means, the concept of face, and symbolic interactionism, individual social interactions, and then go into the activity. So that is the plan for today. And so to start off, and I want to say, if you look at the syllabus, I believe we do the Chicago School of Sociology, then we do the Atlanta School of Sociology, and then I think after that is when you have your exam. So I'll be talking about your exam probably in the next lecture video to give you an idea of, kind of how to study for it, and all of that. If you want to just talk to me in the office hours, you can do that, and we can discuss it there. But I will be talking about your exam soon, and I'll also be talking about your final paper as well. So with that being said, we can go ahead and go to the next slide, the Chicago School of Sociology. And so the Chicago School of Sociology is very important because it has been largely accepted as the first real school of sociology. It's the first. University of Chicago is kind of the first school that really looked at the city and took the city as a laboratory and set up the assessment and the analysis and how this laboratory was going to be evaluated within the university setting within that city. It essentially systematized, and you could say, I'm kind of making up a term, scholarized, if you will, institutionalized sociology. Prior to this, Marx and Weber and all these people, they're just kind of writing, they're professors in another, they're individually contributing to this discipline. But the Chicago School of Sociology is taking all of these sociologists, people who are doing these studies, and putting them into one department, bringing them into one school. And they chose Chicago because Chicago was such a unique and interesting city at that time. So you're talking about the latter part of the 19th century. You're talking about, this was after, I think it was what they call now Chicago, the second Chicago, because a large part of it was burnt down in a big fire. And so it, was rebuilt in this bigger and better way. This is where you have a lot of, we've talked about this a million times, the Industrial Revolution. There's so much happening in the city of Chicago. There's so much trade, there's so much economics, there's so much politics. You see the large range of class differences from the extremely wealthy to the extremely poor and destitute. You see so many different ways in which we could really study social life just in this city, right? And so it literally, many people looked at it as the perfect city for us to really study American life, especially from an economics perspective, right? When you look at all different aspects of social life, or all different aspects of the way in which people are able to carry out their everyday needs and wants. You can study unemployment, you can study family, you can study urban life, you can study gender, you can study environment, you can study so many different things just in that one city. So the Chicago School of Sociology was very influential. Also, again, from the turn of the century going into the 20th century until about the 1950s, and probably the what's considered the heyday, or the greatest part of that was probably around World War, from World War I to the end of the Great Depression. You see a lot of growth, you see a lot of change, and we've talked about how that was the time where cities were starting to build up everywhere. So it wasn't just Chicago, right? You had Chicago, you had Philly, you had New York. You had Atlanta in the South, you had Charlotte, you had so many other cities that were building and growing, right, during this time. So it wasn't the only one, but it was definitely one of the bigger ones. And so there's this large urbanization that's happening. One big trend was that there was this huge population shift from the rural areas to the urban areas. And so it was, it was people moving from the agrarian societies to the metropolis, where it was very heterogeneous. American cities were seeing this huge explosive growth. And again, Chicago was just the main place for that. And so, with that, the University of Chicago took that as a way in which they can say, hey, maybe this is a sign, maybe this is a place where we could really start to kick off this new and budding discipline. And so the University of Chicago kind of harbored that idea as being the first university to have a department of sociology in 1892, right? At least that's the argument, right? At least that's the argument. We're gonna look at something next week, but right now we'll just stick with Chicago, because that is the narrative that kind of exists within our discipline, that the Chicago School is the first school of sociology. And we're not going to go into every single professor, but a lot of your major white professors came out of there. The two that we're going to talk about today came out of there. Even major, professors of color, Black professors, women professors came out of there. But typically the Chicago School is known for birthing, particularly in early sociology, prominent white sociologists, right? And so when we look at the Chicago School, it was very much heavily qualitative. Right? It was very heavily qualitative. There was a lot of, interviews that were being done. There was a lot of, talking, observing. Observation was the biggest one. We'll talk about that in a second. But observation was the main way in which people did studies. And so they use this data and this analysis to literally look at the city as kind of this kind of social laboratory where they can begin to understand American life. And so the Chicago School looked at all of the major concerns of most urban cities, right? Whether you're talking about urban decay, whether you're talking about crime, whether you're talking about race relations, family, all of these different things, these sociologists at the Chicago School were studying. And they were looking for more formal ways, more systematic approaches to analyzing this data. And they were looking to, continue that trend of the science in sociology. And remember, that started with Auguste Comte. When Auguste Comte says, instead of just assuming we know or making assumptions about people's social experiences, we need to, really sit down and put it through the scientific method. And so that's essentially what they started doing earlier on. And then that's what the Chicago School wanted to continue. And so they did all types of different methods to collect this data, but a lot of it was very much highly qualitative, particularly ethnographies. So they use ethnographic data. I'm not sure if you are familiar with ethnographic data, if you've taken research methods or if you know about ethnographies, but typically with an ethnography, you are studying people in a specific locale. And, a lot of times you spend a lot of time there, you sit there, you may interview people, you may live in that area. Sometimes ethnographers will literally, if they get grant funding, they will buy an apartment or rent out a house in a particular neighborhood and just sit and watch and observe and learn and interview and ask questions and go to meetings and dialogue with people in order to, come up with some kind of, to answer a certain kind of question. And so this ethnographic type of data collection was done in the Chicago School. And so it brought a lot of richness to the work, right? The fact that they were able to get people's lived experiences was big. However, one of the things that made this work limiting was the fact that it was overly qualitative. And so they used so much of people's lived experiences that they typically excluded some of the quantitative measures that could be used to help triangulate the data and help provide a better argument for whatever it is they were theorizing, right? And so that is, that was oftentimes the conundrum, right, with the Chicago School. And sometimes even now, some people are qualitative, some people are quantitative. Very rarely do you have somebody really identify as mixed methods, but some people either choose qualitative or quantitative, and both of them are important, but too much of one is not necessarily good, right? So, and not only that, but having a balance of both can always help your argument, right? If you can prove something both from a qualitative standpoint as well as a quantitative standpoint, then that usually helps with your argument. So the Chicago School, the researchers, again, they used human nature, observation as their main source of collecting data, observing people in their natural habitat. And the main assumption for the Chicago School of Sociology was that this naturalistic observation was the best way to study urban and social phenomena. They felt like if we want to know people's lived experiences, we're going to have to observe them in their natural habitat. But sometimes in doing that, people are only, they may just really be saying that because they don't want to interact with people. They just want to kind of look from afar, come up with solutions, and then publish them and go about their day. But if you really want to get involved, if you really want to really bring about change, sometimes you have to really interact with people and talk with people and get uncomfortable and ask questions and do follow-up questions and really uncover and really unpack what it is that, the problem that's occurring, right? So again, a lot of the research that was done in the Chicago School of Sociology was dedicated to looking for answers related to the things we discussed earlier, like crime and homelessness and property values and things of the like, right? Problems that typically we would see in a big city, right? And really one of the major questions that, the Chicago School of Sociology was trying to answer was, how in such a new city could decay be so prevalent? How in such a new city could urban decay be so prevalent? Meaning this city has been well enough to rebuild itself after this fire. Factories are popping up everywhere. People have jobs, right? We're doing better. We're not agrarian like we were 50, 60, 70 years ago. This is the latter part of the 19th century. We're moving into a 20th century. The country is moving into being a real global superpower. Why in the world is such a key city, such an important city, in such disarray? Right? And so that was the main question that the Chicago School of Sociology was looking to answer. And so one of the ideas that they used to help come up with an answer to this question was this notion of the disorganization theory. And the disorganization theory is this idea that the environment of the city is dramatically different from the agricultural communities that most immigrants are coming from. And it actually acts as a force to look at the structures, relationships, and norms of their homeland irrelevant to their new living situation. So that's the idea of this disorganization theory, right? And so in looking at this place as a much better place, a much better structure, we start to see that not only are individuals becoming disorganized from a geographic standpoint, but then we start to see there's so much faith in the city, and the city is not pouring back into the people, particularly the poor and working class people that are making the city what it is. Okay. And so, you know, the concerns of the Chicago School of Sociology, you know, they continue to look at the everyday lives of people and their everyday experiences, and looking at how this situation resonated with the study of more modern social systems. So how this resonates with capitalism, how this resonates with Jim Crow, how this resonates with globalization. How are things that are happening in the city, how does this relate to what is going on in the larger world? What is going on with other ways of being around the country? And so they took these big, you know, large questions, and many of them believed that the answer was in the individual. The answer was in the individual interaction of the people, not the individual in terms of like a psychologist. These are still social people, these are still sociologists, but in terms of the individual interactions of the people. That's what, yeah, that was what that is what they're studying, and that is what they're looking at. And any new systems that come about, which you also find during this time in the early part of the 20th century, you have this resurgence of Marxism. Marx is popular when he's alive, but when he dies, oh my goodness, people love Marx. Marx would have never known how big he would be in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, man. But Marxism really starts to take off. And again, these are these new modern social systems that the sociologists are saying, how does this relate? How is what's happening in the city relating to this? And so they're looking at this on the individual, people's individual interactions. And obviously, if you remember from what we talked about with the major theories of from early on, and I'm pretty sure you've seen this at least in intro or something. You know, the three major theories of sociology: you have the conflict theory, you have the functionalist theory, and you have symbolic interactionism. And so this, where we're going, not that Chicago School always used symbolic interactionism, but the people that we're going to talk about come out of this symbolic interactionist tradition. George Herbert Mead and Irving Goffman. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about people's interaction on an individual level. All right, if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start with George Herbert Mead's, and I want to say he came up with this in the late 20th, 19th century, early 20th century, something like that. But this notion of self, me, and I, right? So I know the readings may have been kind of boring, especially with so much, it's a lot of kind of older English, if you will. So that's why, the reading sometimes can be boring. So I try to explain it in a very concise way. I am pushing you to be able to, understand these readings, especially if this is a field that you want to go into. But then as as an instructor, it's my job to kind of break it down and, be able to explain it in a way that you can understand. So with George Herbert Mead's Self, Me, and I, one of the things he talks about, he starts off talking about body actions, right? And so he's looking at people and the way that we interact with each other on an everyday basis. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you take a shower, you do whatever it is you do for the day, eat breakfast, and then you go about your day. And he's looking at all of the various interactions that you have. Interactions, think about the interactions that you have with maybe your professors, or maybe your partner, or maybe your, child or children, maybe your dog, maybe, the person at the grocery store, maybe somebody who, when you're walking to the bus stop, or maybe when you stop and get a cup of coffee and, you talk to somebody, or maybe when you go to the grocery store, you're interacting with people, or maybe if you're on social media and you're interacting with people, and then you come back home, whatever, right? These everyday interactions, George Herbert Mead is saying, these are some ways in which the larger society can be affected. It's not just conflict. We're looking at big conflict. It's not just functionalism, where we're looking at how institutions function within a society, but also the way in which these little interactions also affect us on a big scale as well. And so body actions basically talks about how the body can do some things without thinking, right? So when you first think about, wherever you are, whether you're getting ready to go somewhere and you're watching this early in the morning, or whether you just came off from work or came back from campus or whatever, right? And you are, and wherever you went, you might have driven, right? You drove somewhere. Can you remember thinking about what you had to do in order to drive? Did you have to get in your car and say, okay, in order for me to drive this car, I need to take this key, I need to put it in the ignition, and I need to turn it. I shouldn't turn it all the way because it may make that weird sound. Just turn it enough to hear it crank, right? Or you may have the fancy push button start. I don't have that, so that's why I said turn. But you may have the fancy push button start. Did you think about, okay, now I'm going to use this finger, and I'm going to lower this finger to the button and press it so that this push button can start. Now I'm going to put my right foot on this brake, and I'm going to put the car in drive. And then I'm going to take my right foot off of the brake and then put it on the gas and then back out or drive out. And I'm going to make sure that I don't push it too hard, but just enough so that it moves. And then I'm going to turn my head, right? So you get what I'm saying, right? So did you have to think about all those things when you're driving? No. All you did was say, oh, I need to get ready to go to work. I went somewhere this morning and I don't remember doing any of those things. I just got in the car, the key, it was like my body just went into when it went into mode. Those are called body actions. How your body can do things and you don't even think about it. You can't even remember the last time you thought about driving. Maybe when you were 16 or 15 or whenever you started, but you actually had to think about it. You don't think about driving now, you just do it. You don't even, a lot of times you may not even think about how you're getting to a certain place or how you're getting home, because you just know this is the way. I don't have to put it in my GPS. I don't have to think about, do I turn this way or that way? You know how to get home from school. You know how to get home from wherever, work or wherever. And so that's body action. So that's how everything starts. It starts with the body. And then within the body, we have the self. Within our body, we have our self. And our self is that individual component that is shaped by how society and members of the same social group view us. That is the self. That is what Mead calls the self. It's that part of us that is shaped by society and the members of the same social group. So people within your family, people within your friend group, people within your racial group, people within your gender group. The things that you do that are affected by that is yourself. That's yourself. That's what Mead calls yourself. Then that is a part of your body, but that's not the physical. The body is a lot of the physical things. The self is now, this is the more mind-body duality that exists. And that part that gets shaped by what other people think of you, essentially. So an example would be if you're hanging out with your friends and somebody says, you know, you're really funny. And you'll say, really? I'm funny? And they say, yes, I'm just cracking up at you. Every time we hang out, I'm always laughing. So then the person may say, oh. But then if somebody new meets them and say, hey, well, how would you describe yourself? Well, I'm this, I'm that. I also think I'm funny. When people tell me I'm funny, so maybe I'm funny. I was just watching a comedian. This is one of my favorite comedians. Her name is Miss Pat. She is hilarious. And I was watching an interview with her and she talked about how she got into comedy because, so I think it was, she was at the welfare office or something. And she was getting some government assistance from, no, it wasn't her parole officer when she got out of prison. I think it might have been her parole officer when she got out of prison. And she said that she was meeting with her and she said that the parole officer thought she was so funny and said, you should go into comedy. You're really talented. And that's how she got in, because somebody told her, she didn't see herself as funny, but somebody told her, you have really funny stories and the way you tell these stories are really funny. And so you should go into comedy. And so she did. And now she's a, comedian, goes all over the world, has her own television show and everything, right? So that is an example of the self. This part of you that is shaped by what other people think about you. So it's almost like, can you think about what it's like, or something that we've talked about that was very similar to that concept of self? We literally just talked about it maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. And you can pause the video here if you want to think about it. So this is a lot like Cooley's looking glass self. I don't know if you remember that. And Cooley's looking glass self, we talked about how Du Bois's double consciousness comes out of that looking glass self. Okay, so George Herbert Mead is basically kind of saying the same thing, just calling it something different. He's calling it self. It's kind of saying the same thing, how we are influenced by society. Everybody's really saying the same thing. what's his name? We did talk about this person as well. Foucault, he calls it what does he call it? Not body. What does Foucault call it? I forgot. It's gonna come to me later, but it's something that has to do with the body, like beating. Well, the concept is beating one's body into submission. I can't remember, but there's a phrase that Foucault uses that says basically the same thing. How our society, morphs and shapes us into whose it wants us to be. And so Mead's theory is built on the idea of these individual experiences, right? How him or her themselves, through their experiences, influence themselves and other people within their social group. And so this means that the way in which we conceptualize ourselves is limited to experiences. How we understand who we are is based on our experiences. That's all we can base it. We a lot of times we can't take on a different idea if we haven't experienced it. Whether it be seeing it afar or seeing it up close, you can only go as far as you can see. That's a scientific fact. That's also like a philosophical idea. You can only go as far as you can see. But when someone opens your eyes to new ideas, if someone says, hey, this is possible, and you can say, oh, okay, I can do that. So whether people are identified by symbolic interactions that we all encounter in the social experience, or whether it's by individuals, it is this kind of self idea that makes up who we are. Now, within the self, there are two different types of selves. There's two different components. So again, notice how I have it down in the lecture. You have your body, and then under the body is yourself, and then self is split off into the me and the I. So you have your me self and your I self. And your me self is the part of the self that regulates our behavior based on how we imagine others to perceive us. How we imagine others to perceive us. Right? So again, a lot like double consciousness, a lot like looking glass self. That part of us that regulates people's behavior based on how we imagine others to perceive us. So an example of that, well, what I'll do is I'll do the me and the I, and then I'll give you an example of both. So that's the me. The I is the part of ourselves that is the response of the individual to the attitude of the community as this appears in one's own experience. So the me self is how you act based on how you perceive people to look at you. And the I self is more of your authentic reaction. So let's say, for example, you're at your job and your boss is conversing with you. Your boss is talking with you. And your boss says something that you do not agree with. You don't like it. Okay? You don't agree with something that your boss says. And so through your I, what you really want to do is you want to go off on your boss. You want to tell your boss off. You want to say A, and you have all these choice words, whether they are explicit or non-explicit. You have all of these choice words for your boss. However, your me, that's the I part, but your me part says that they would expect you to respond as the employee. And so you respond in a respectful way. And you say, I defer to you based on your understanding of the role and your expected behavior. So your me role is your professional role. Sometimes we might call it the professional role. The me role is usually kind of the second or third thought you have. Your I role is your first thought. Who are you talking to? I know you must be crazy. All right, if you say that again, it's going to be a problem. That's typically the I. The me says, okay, I need this job. I don't want to cause any problems. Listen, these are some things in which I may not agree with. I would probably suggest that you take this up with another person. I won't be able to help you at this time. That's the me response. So the I is what you want to do. The me is kind of like the other part of you. Okay. So these are some questions that you may want to consider. These are some questions you may want to consider. But thinking about the body as a whole, the self, then the me, and then the I. And think about Mead's explanation of the me and the I. Think about the difference between the two. And then I want you to think about which of these two dictates more of our daily life in terms of how we present ourselves to others. Which one of these do you think you see more in people? Do you think you see the me in the person or the I in the person? Just, you might want to pause and just think about that. I think that we see more of, this is just me personally, I think we see more of the me in people. We see more of the image that they want to put forth. Keep forgetting the other brother's name. Oh, Goffman. Goffman is going to call that face. Talk about that in a second. Face or mask. Talk about that in a second. But I think we see more of the me, which I think a lot of times, because that I is suppressed, it gets carried out in other ways. The me takes a role, and then in social media, the I can come out without a person even knowing the me or the self or the body, because people hide behind fake accounts. There's a I forgot her name, but she did a study called Two-Faced Racism, and she talks about the front stage and the backstage. She did it with Joe Fagan. But yeah, similar to that in that way. You have this presentation of self, right? George Herbert Mead also has this big, analysis called the presentation of self. So you have this presentation of who you are, then you have who you really are, your I. And I don't think people see our eyes too much. They usually see our me's. But the idea is, as you get, and this is part of what Cooley is saying, we didn't go all into this, but part of Cooley's analysis is that as you get older, as you become more mature, this is when you start to not lose, but you start to not care so much about your me, and you start to care more about your I. Your I starts to pick up. And now who you are is not as much shaped by society, but now you're starting to go into your authentic self and be who you really want to be. This is why older people, they're kind of funny, they just kind of say whatever they want to say. Because they're like, you know what, I don't even care anymore. I'm not trying to pretend and put on this self or put on this looking glass or put on this double consciousness or put on this face or mask. Moving from my me over to my I. Second, so if the me aspect is the part that is formed through socialization, and it is also what constantly influences our decision, how much agency do we really have? That's a good question. That's a really good question. Think about that. Take some time. Think about how much agency do we really have in our lives? A lot of times we talk about having agency, being able to think for ourselves, free thinkers, free thinkers, free thinkers. But are we really? Do we really live in a society where people can really, truly be free thinkers? Are we as free as we say we are if we're socialized so much by what is supposed to be the norm or the ideal, based on people in power and based on what the majority says things are supposed to be? If the me aspect is the part that is formed through socialization, and it is also what constantly influences our decision, do we really have agency over ourselves? That is really what Foucault is talks a lot about in his, I cannot think of the phrase, but the idea of our bodies. It was just on the tip of my tongue. Docile bodies. That's it. I was like, what is it? Docile bodies. That's his argument with docile bodies, is that our bodies are being molded and shaped based on society. And so I think what they would argue is that we're not as free, basically critiquing America and saying we're not as free as you say we are. You say we're free, but we're really not. So what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to look at this link. This is an example of the I versus me concept. And I want you to not tell me, but I just want you to think about which person would be considered the I and which one is the me, right? In this link, this kind of comedic presentation. So take some time, click on that link, think about that, think about these questions, and then come back. I've been trying to actually show the videos in the Zoom, but then every time I upload it to YouTube, they always block me. So then it takes me a long time to upload these videos because I have to take out the clips. So I can't do that anymore. So you're gonna have to watch the clip and then, for yourself. All right, so let's go to Irving Goffman, the notion of face and face work. Go to this notion of face and face work. So again, two major sociologists from the Chicago School, just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of work that came out of the Chicago School of Sociology. Again, very important school, definitely a staple in our discipline. So it's extremely important for you to be familiar with the School of Sociology. And then next week, we're going to go into another school of sociology that has been brought forth by folks like, he's out of University of Central Florida. Forgot that professor's name. Yes, slips my mind right now. Alden Morris and many others. I'm going to talk about another school of sociology next week. So Irving Goffman in the 1950s talks about face and face work. So you were supposed to read that for your other reading. So essentially, Irving Goffman starts this off by saying everyone lives in a world of social encounters. Basically saying what I'm getting ready to talk about really can be applied to every person. Because everybody lives in a world where we encounter somebody or some people. We don't live in a world nobody lives in a world that is completely absolved from all people. Whether those social encounters are good or bad or indifferent, they're all social encounters. So my question, have you ever been told to save face? Have you ever heard that phrase before? You need to save face. I know you all are younger than I am. So I don't know if your parents have ever said that or if you ever heard that term or if that's just an older term, but I know I've heard that before. So have you ever been told to save face? And if so, what does that mean? What does it mean to save face? So we're going to talk a little bit about face, but before we talk about face, we first want to talk about this phrase called, or this concept called line. And so line is a pattern of verbal and nonverbal acts that a person uses to express how they view a situation and how they look at all participants of the situation. So the things that we do, the lines are the things that we do. It's almost like, I guess you can even say like lines in a play or lines in a movie. Like the things that we do, the verbal and nonverbal acts that we put on to look at a situation. So you may come into the classroom on the first day of class. First thing you're going to do is you're looking, and what are some first things that you may do? You may see, is there anybody in here I might know? Anybody taking a class with me? That took a class with me before. If so, that could be your nonverbal act. And if so, your nonverbal act will be to go sit with that person, and your verbal act will be to say, hey, you remember me? Oh, I remember you from my such and such class. I didn't know you were taking this class. Me either. What do you think about the professor? Or did you hear anything? I haven't heard anything, but you know, hopefully it's cool. Hopefully this class is easy because I just got a job, and so I don't need something taking up too much of my time. Yeah, me neither. I'm just trying to get an A and get out of here. I'm just trying to get my degree and leave. So I hope it's not too much work. You know, that kind of thing, right? So you have the verbal acts, the nonverbal acts that you use. All of these are lines. And we're looking at, we're evaluating all the participants. Wow, it's a lot of people in this class. Okay, cool. Hey, maybe we should start a chat group, talk about different things. If we don't understand something, or start a study group for these exams. It looks like we have exams this semester, right? These are lines, the verbal, nonverbal acts that we do to express how we look at a situation and how all participants are going to be involved. Now, face, and the term face, or sometimes it's called mask. Sometimes it's called face, sometimes it's called mask. Refers to the way a person conducts himself according to the line that they assume the environment believes that that person has taken. So very similar to the me. The face is the positive social value that a person believes they have, and the ways in which people look to preserve their image in social interactions. So there's a certain image you want to push forward. That may be true, it may be not, or it may not be. But there's a certain image you want to put out there. There's a certain face. Now, part of that face could actually be your true self. And then part of it could maybe is adjusted. If you were to interact with me, and some of you have interacted with me, and you may interact with me, you may say, hey, professor, how are you? Good, I'm really enjoying your class. I had a question about this. And maybe in some ways that you're talking to me is your authentic self. But then also maybe you're thinking, okay, but I also want to make sure I put forth a good image because this is my professor, this is my grade. I want to make sure I, present myself well. So it could be that. So it could be a little bit of the real and a little bit of, I just want to put forth this image. And that's called face. And we all do it, right? We all do it. We all try to put forth a certain image of ourselves. And so an example would be a person presents their profession or their religion in a good way by presenting themselves in a good way. So another example would be for somebody who's religious. If someone knows that you're a Christian, then something you may have been taught in church, on Sunday school or Sabbath school, or however you were raised, make sure that you represent Christianity well. Make sure you represent the Christian church well. Make sure you represent Jesus well. So you're presenting your religion in a positive way. That's your face. And your line is the actual religion or whatever it is that you're representing. That is the situation. The situation is what you're representing, or that's part of the line is the situation. And then what you're representing, and then the self is, or the face is that part of that self, particularly, I would probably say the I. No, not the I, the me, sorry. And so essentially with these masks are, or the faces are preserved in two ways: self-respect plus the consideration for others. You have self-respect, you add that with consideration for others, and that's how you preserve your mask. So how do you maintain this mask that you might wear to present to save face or to present a good image of yourself? You think about how you want to be respected, and then you think about how others are going to be affected by the way in which you're presenting yourself. And if you add those two things together, that typically ends up in saving face or presenting a good face. Now, sometimes a person may find themselves in a situation where they may be using the wrong face, or the face that they may be presenting does not fit with the line dictated to them by their environment. So this might happen when a person is caught without having been prepared for that line in advance, and they haven't necessarily formed the mask that they need in that particular situation. So when a person is in the right face for a given situation, then you feel better. You feel more confident, right? If you're in the right face with the given situation. I don't know if you've ever seen, I think it's a commercial or something talks about like internet connection or something. And this friend is inviting this person out, but the internet keeps cutting off. And so all they hear is, hey, I want to invite you something tonight, 8 at my place, costume, blah, 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 blah. And so they were like, oh, okay, cool. So they put on this fancy costume, and then they show up at the door, and it's like a black tie thing. And they're like, why are you doing that? Why are you wearing that? And they say, I thought it was a costume party. And basically, when you go back to the conversation that the two people were having, if it didn't break up, then you would have heard the person say, hey, I want to invite you to my black tie event. It's going to be at my house. Make sure you dress really, really well. Don't wear any costumes or things like that. A friend of mine wore a costume to one of my parties and it turned out so bad. So don't wear that type thing. That's an example. That's a right face, but that's the wrong situation, right? Right face, wrong situation. And so typically when that happens, people move with a sense of poise. They suppress themselves. They conceal the tendency to feel ashamed during an encounter. They maintain a sense of poise so that they can maintain or maintain their face. And so, again, in looking at this individual interaction between people, this idea of trying to maintain poise, this idea of trying to put forth a specific face or a specific mask, it makes us wonder, how does this relate to what sociology is supposed to be, which is the study of how different things that we do apply to the larger society? All right, that's the overall question. And so we can go to page 334 if you have the third edition, page 334. If you don't have the third edition, I think some people have the 6th edition. then just go to the essay that has Irving Goffman on face work and go to the section that says face and social relationships. That's why I have that in parentheses. And just that first, we're going to start where it says when a person begins, face and social relationships. When a person begins a mediated or immediate encounter, he already stands in some kind of social relationship to the others concerned and expects to stand in a given relationship to them after the particular encounter ends. This, of course, is one of the ways in which social contacts are geared into the wider society. Much of the activity occurring during an encounter can be understood as an effort or everyone's part to get through the occasion and all the unanticipated and unintentional events that can cast participants in an undesirable light without disrupting the relationships of the participants. So you see, when we have these individual interactions and we're presenting these faces, we're doing it in a way that helps us get past it so that we can now make applications to the larger society. And we keep doing this so that we don't have these unintentional consequences so that we can continue to make face and continue to, and so it's almost like a compounding effect. And this is how these, even in the symbolic interactionist perspective, it's still sociology, because the more smaller individual interactions we have, and we continue to do this over time, it becomes the way in which our society functions as a whole. Now, saving face, wearing a mask, all of these things are bigger issues. Now they're bigger issues. Now we're getting ready to do two assignments that show how what we do on an individual level can now be applied to the broader level, particularly with the first assignment, which is going to be about race, and the second assignment, which is going to be about gender. The gender one is the longer assignment. But essentially, the mask is what any man, woman, non-binary person uses to conduct themselves in the best way. You're learning the rules of engagement. You're learning the rules of interaction for the larger society, for social interaction. Okay. And so with these assignments, the first one is we wear the mask assignment. So now we're going to see, okay, so now we're talking about these masks. Now we're talking about these faces that we put on. How does this relate to larger issues of race and class and gender and sexuality and poverty and work and play and environment? Well, here it is. Well, I don't know how it works with environment and all that, but definitely race and gender. Okay. So first one, we wear the mask assignment. So you can either read the poem or you can watch it. I just thought it'd be more interesting to watch it as opposed to just reading it. But this was a poem written by a famous Black poet. His name is Paul Laurence Dunbar. Okay, he wrote this in 1895. And in this poem, he is talking about the masks that Black people have to wear in front of white people as they have to navigate Jim Crow. That's the idea. That's what this mask is about, that Paul Laurence Dunbar is talking about. Okay. So I want you to watch and I want you to listen to this poem. That gives you an idea. And then he goes into a much kind of bigger conversation, right? Giving details and things like that. So I want you to watch this poem. I want you to listen. I want you to read it. Right there at that link. And then I want you to answer these following questions. What does this poem mean? Don't just tell me what I just told you. What does this poem really mean? In short, what message or messages is Paul Laurence Dunbar trying to convey in this poem? And I want to actually know that you've read the poem and that you've thought about the poem and that you've analyzed it by taking a few lines from the poem and explaining what the author means in each of these lines. You don't have to do the whole poem, but take 3 or 4 lines. And what does he mean by that line? What does he mean by that line? What does he mean by that line? Kind of give me a little bit of detail. Show me that you're thinking. That's how I'm grading you all, based on how I'm convinced that you're really thinking through this thing. How does Paul Laurence Dunbar's explanation of the mask compare and contrast with Goffman's explanation of the face/mask? So talking about how Paul Laurence Dunbar understands the mask, how is this relating to what Goffman said about the face and the mask? We just talked about it. And I want you to use information from the reading and lecture to answer that question. So I want you to pull from it. You don't have to do a whole bunch of quotes. I don't want a whole bunch of quotes. You can probably do one, but give me a concept. We talked about a bunch of different concepts. We talked about lines. We talked about face mask. We talked about, what else? What was the other one? Poise. We talked about a lot of different stuff. So pull from that and make that connection. Use information from the reading and lecture to answer that question. How do you see comparisons and contrasting happening between the two? The poem and Goffman's writing, which interestingly enough came out around the same time. No, I'm sorry, no, it didn't. Goffman is in 1955. I'm thinking about Cooley. And then, so you're going to do this in a 1 to 2 page paper, double space, times the Roman, you see it all, right? Deadline, Friday, October 1st at 12:50 p.m. Submit under online assignments. No extensions will be granted. Obviously, you still have that 2-day grace period that I give for almost all assignments. So you have that, but there won't be any extensions granted. So that's that. Now, pay very close attention to this second online assignment. I know some people probably don't even watch these videos. They just go straight to the PowerPoint. I wouldn't suggest that, especially for the exam, but you know, whatever people want to do. So for the second assignment, you are going to be required to watch the documentary below called The Mask You Live In. It's a regular documentary, hour and a half or so, right? And that's the YouTube link below. So you're going to be required to watch it. And while watching this documentary, so you're going to pull it up. This is what I would suggest. I didn't write all this down, so this is why I'm hoping that people are watching this. While watching the documentary, you're going to answer the question. So pull up the documentary, right? Click on the link, pull it up in another window. You're going to go to the Mask You Live In questions. If you go to your assignments tab, you're going to see a link that says the Mask You Live In assignment, and that's where you'll see the questions. Just download it. It's going to be in a Microsoft Word format. And then what you're going to do, just pull up the documentary and just watch it. Watch it. And then as you're watching it, when you pay attention, just look at the first question. As you're watching it, and then you're going to hear the first question come up. So get ready, listen to it, listen for the answer, write it, type it up. If you miss it, just rewind it, go back. Oh, okay, that was the answer. Boom. Once you get that answer, you're going to wait for a little bit. You're going to watch. And the second answer is going to come up. Oh, that's the second answer. Like it might say true or false, you know, 3 out of 10 boys, you know, suffer from suicidal thoughts or something like that. True or false, right? And so you'll think, you know, you'll wait for that answer to come up. And when it comes up, you pause the video, write that answer, then unpause it. And you're going to do that for all of your questions. You're going to do that for all your questions. So as you watch the documentary, you will find the answers to the questions. Record the answers on a separate Microsoft Word document. Okay, so on a separate document, you're going to record your answers. Once you have completed all the questions, you're going to take those answers and you're going to upload them back to that assignments tab that says the Mask You Live In assignment. You're going to upload it back there. Okay, the deadline to complete this is October 4th, 12:50 p.m. So, and if you're still confused, please see the lecture video, Chicago School of Sociology, where I explain it in more detail. That's this. So if you're already watching this, then you're good. You shouldn't have any questions. But if you do, you know, always you can email me or come in office hours, but I think that should be, I think that's pretty detailed enough. If you do have questions, I put that there for people who I know are not watching the lecture videos, they're just reading the PowerPoints. Don't ask me any questions until you watch the video. So if you ask me any questions, I'm going to ask you, did you watch the lecture video? Because I laid it all out. Okay. So trying to be as clear as possible so that you know exactly what you're doing. And then if there's something that you're confused about, you know, as always, you can reach out to me and I'll do my best to answer. But if you ask me a question that I know I answered already, then I'm going to refer you to the PowerPoint or I'll refer you to the lecture video. Okay. With that being said, have a great day, have a great week, have a great weekend. I'm enjoying reading your assignments, and some of them are really good. Some of them, especially the ones that really have depth, and I'm enjoying the conversations and things like that with your discussions. So for many of you, keep up the good work. If you're not turning in your assignments, I would highly suggest you do that. It can definitely negatively impact your grade. If you really haven't been paying attention in class, you know, watching the PowerPoints, watching the lecture videos, taking notes, I'll be able to tell with the upcoming exam. So just want to make sure that, you know, you're on point. And always, if you have any questions, I'm always willing to help in any way that I can. As long as you are helping yourself and you're putting forth the effort, I'll do everything I can to hopefully make this a great experience, and hopefully you get everything that you pay for and going to college. So with that being said, have a great day, great week. See you in office hours. Yep. Peace out.